And the next session is the panel on accessibility, digital divide and skill, which will be moderated by Thomas Bignall. He's the head policy of SPD, European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities. I did it right. He has a bachelor in politics and international relations and a master in international law. He has specific experience in social services ecosystem with focus on its European Union dimension. Is it right?
Yes.
Yeah, I found it in LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I will just get up on stage. I think well, first of all, maybe I can invite to stage our fellow experts. So can I ask Alejandro Moledo, who is Deputy Director and Head of Policy at the European Disability Forum, to come to stage. Then can I ask Susanna Lauden, who is Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Funka, to come to stage. If you could sit down here, please, Alejandro.
Thank you.
And Susanna just next to Alejandro, please. And then I'd like to invite Dr. May Adjus to come to stage. And she is a senior assistive technology practitioner for Agencia Support in Malta to come. Thank you, May. And last but not least, Eva-Gianna Hugo-Welf, who is the director of the We Care More Center for Innovation and Research at IOS Bologna in Italy.
We haven't met before, I think.
So thank you, everybody. We have around 1 hour to discuss accessibility, digital divide, and skills. And we have, I think, amongst yourselves, quite a broad diversity of knowledge about this topic. So we will maybe start with the basics and then increasingly go into a bit more, let's say, level of expertise and technicality. So first of all, I am Thomas Bignall. I am a man, 35 years old, a checkered shirt and short, dark hair. So if we could also present ourselves in that way as well for people who may have visual impairments. The way we will proceed is I'll have maybe 2 rounds of questions for our speakers here, and then we'll open it up to you for if you have any questions and so forth. And the idea is to try and keep it interactive, no long presentations, just a bit of short interaction, because that is a good way to sort of explore more into the digital divide area. So I will start with you, Alejandro. Thank you for being here. I will ask each of you, actually this was unplanned, but a first question, a very basic question defining the topics that we're going to be discussing today. So Alejandro, we talk about the digital divide. What is the digital divide, in particular for persons with disabilities?
Thank you very much, Thomas. And well, I'm also 35, white male with beard, similarly like Thomas, but less good looking, I think, and with a jacket, which I think it was a bad idea. So many thanks for the invitation. Well, the digital divide, the way we understand it generally is the gap between the number of people that benefit from using technologies and the number of people who cannot benefit or don't benefit from using technologies. And in the case of it applies to different population, not only persons with disabilities. We can think of older people, we can think of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds and contexts. So it doesn't relate only to persons with disabilities. But in the case of persons with disabilities, this can obviously relate to certain barriers concerning the availability of technologies and the availability of assistive technology, the interoperability of these assistive technologies, which are the technologies specifically designed for persons with disabilities, and the mainstream technologies that everybody uses, the affordability of the technologies as well. So there we can come up with a long list of barriers that we will need to address, but I will leave it there since you asked for a short answer.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. I think a clear answer there around the digital divide. Susanna, again, we talk a lot about accessibility. Most of us probably think we know what it means, but actually, what does it mean for you as an expert?
Oh, that's a Thank you for that very small question. So I think we could discuss terminology for ages, or we still do in the industry. But so first of all, I'm not a robot, and I don't think I'm invited here for my looks. So I kind of disagree with that self-identification things. I won't do that. Sorry, but. Accessibility has several definitions. I mean, there's an ISO definition about what it is, and of course, it has to do with the possibility for product, services, systems, facilities, I think is the terms, to work well for everyone, for every person or people, independent of their capabilities, abilities, and needs, and so on. I can't really quote that from the top of my head, but it's something like that. To me, accessibility has to do with humans. So I think we already had a discussion before here that there is a thought about a kind of an idea of accessibility to have to do with code. It's technology. So no. We work with care. We work with people with disabilities, but we don't really do accessibility. And I think that is the biggest problem we have, that misconception that accessibility is just tech. It's not. It's much broader than that, and it has to do with the individual. So to me personally, I think accessibility is very closely related to the choice, the independent choice. I need somebody to clap to hear that they are applauding. I don't, but a deaf person needs this to see that they're applauding. And we need to do that. We can't just say do one thing. We need to do both. So that is alternatives and different ways, the multimodal way of doing technology. And I think that is where the digital solutions and the tools are so fantastic, because then you can provide visual things and captions and sound and all of these different formats in one, which is much harder to do in the real world, where you have a book or something that is just showing it in one way. So I would say, to me personally, accessibility has to do with independent choice.
Thank you very much for that, Susanna. Now, Dr. May, sitting here on my panel, or May, assistive technology. What is assistive technology?
Okay, following on from Susanna, I have no intention of revealing my age to any of you, and my hair is multicolored right now. What was the question again?
What is assistive technology?
Okay, so I think the question that you actually gave me in writing was what kinds of assistive technologies are being currently...
That's coming later.
Oh, it's coming later?
Yeah.
Okay. So assistive technology, any kind of solution, I suppose, that's going to support someone to participate or maintain their function, and hopefully support independence in terms of anything they might want to do, be it education, employability, or even in terms of leisure activities, I think.
Thank you, May. And then last but not least for you, Eva-Diane, another surprise. Digital skills. What are digital skills? I like to make her life a bit difficult for us.
Yeah, like a test.
That's, we're here to complicate our own lives. Okay, so I'm Eva-Diane, I'm a white male, about 60 years, close to 60, by the way. Digital skills. Digital skills are the skills that we need to be able to interact with environments, digital environments. And digital skills allow us to participate in society, in a whole lot of processes that are actually moving to a sort of a digital environment. So not having appropriate digital skills means remaining behind, being excluded from all kind of processes that are happening in society, whether these are related to learning, to employment, to political participation. So it's fundamental to participate in the digital society. And for that, you need digital skills.
Thank you, Eva-Diane. There was a bit of a surprise for our speakers. I hadn't prepared them about this, but I thought the idea was to have a very good, let's say, basis that we're all on the same line around these topics that we're going to use later today. So thank you for your flexibility there. So now, Alejandro, you are a representative of people with disabilities based here in Brussels. In your view, what do you think are the three main measures required to bridge the digital divide for persons with disabilities? So how can we bridge the digital divide?
Okay, so my answer I'm going to be sneaky. I'm going to try to put more than 3. But there is one that is kind of like the mantra that I've been repeating for over, I think, almost 10 years now, which is the AAA condition that I mentioned also in my previous reply, that in order for persons with disabilities to really take advantage of technologies, this needs to be available, affordable, and accessible. And that is something that we've been addressing in the advocacy work that EDF does here at the European level, and our members also at national level, in terms of ensuring that we all have access to the technology, the infrastructure for the technology to work, and the technology is designed in an accessible manner, and hopefully at affordable prices. Secondly, we need to address the digital skills of persons with disabilities with learning programs that do take into account the wide variety of users, take into account human diversity, and human diversity understood in the full diversity, in the wide diversity, and the widest diversity of users of technology. So users that may use assistive technology as well, users that may have older technology, users that simply want to use certain technology but not other. So we need to address this kind of diversity of users in the modules, aiming at increasing the digital skills. But then the third point, which is not to put the burden just on the users. So that we sometimes talk too much about increasing the digital skills, but what about the technology itself? The technology also needs to become easier to use and easier to understand for all kinds of users. And that's something that we see, that sometimes trends in the technology sector make things either worse or better, depending on the trend. If we think of, for example, the websites, the web technologies, we've seen, we now can think of, these kind of trendy websites that become, something fashionable for a certain time. Remember those websites in Flash? Or remember, those websites that had automatic music when you get in. Then we have the trend, this one was positive, of websites which were responsive to mobile devices that helped accessibility. It's a little bit sad that because of a trend, things get better on accessibility. But in this case, obviously, we take it and we embrace it and promote it. So instead of going so much into, what trends are more fashionable, we need to make an effort in adapting the technology to the users, and not the way around. Not to, increase always the digital skills of users to keep up with the technology, but the technology to become easier to use and easier to understand.
Thank you very much for that, Alejandro. I count 3 points, so on point.
But one had 3.
One had 3, indeed. So 3 times 3, 9, or something like that. Okay. Thank you, Alejandro. So you need to make sure that digital tools are available, affordable, accessible, the 3 A's. Need to recognize the diversity of people as a whole, and need to make sure that they're easy to use and understand, and not always increasingly complex, because that puts the burden on the users. Thank you, Alejandro. I will come back to you later. Susanna, now we're going to get back a bit more on specifically accessibility. In your view, what can be done regarding to bridge the digital divide regarding accessibility in particular?
So how many days do I have to respond to that? No, so Alejandro already said all the clever things, so I don't like to be directly after Alejandro in a panel. That's a bad place to be. But I think I don't want to argue with EDF. I don't want to do that. But I think it's a good thing when it's a trend and when it's something is happening because of something else, and it also becomes accessible. I think that's a good thing, because we need more mainstreaming. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that the Microsofts and other industry players, that they understand that there's a value. I know they do already understand, but I mean to leverage that knowledge so that more products, more mainstream products, become more easy to use and more accessible, so that we don't, I mean, we will always need specific assistive technology and specific solutions, but the more we can mainstream this, I think that would be a good thing. And one way of doing, sorry, I'm not picking on you. So one thing of doing that is, of course, standardization. So the really sexy topic where everyone falls asleep, but I do believe that standardization is one really, really important tool that supports the suppliers and support the users and supports policymakers to make sure that we know what we are talking about and that we have the same definition of accessibility, and then the European legislation can point to the standards. So I think what needs to be, one thing that is close to my heart that needs to be done is the awareness raising and pushing that EDF and similar organizations are doing, and what we in the kind of professional industry, or whatever I should call that sector, can do by providing, working on the standards and making sure that there are technical solutions to support the standards. So we have the push from the NGOs, and then we have the rest of the community, no matter if it's private or public or whatever, or research. We can work together to make sure that we do the most clever solutions and that we kind of add that to the policy work and the legislation, so that because otherwise this will only be true on paper. We need the industry to actually provide the services and the solutions. And if they can be mainstreamed, not all can, but if they can be, that is a very good thing, because then we have more money, and there will always be a need for money in the system. And I don't mind if the big tech company earns money if they do good things.
Indeed. Thank you, Susanna. So trying to summarize, more mainstreaming, more standardization, the added value of standardization for everyone in the industry, or in all the stakeholders. So that's the suppliers, the people who use the services, policymakers, and so forth. And the need in some ways to sort of build up these standards together. NGOs, DPOs, industry research, etc., and to do so together. Thank you, Susanna. Again, I have a few questions to come back on that in more detail later. May, so your job is both as an assistive technology expert, but also you provide support to people. How can assistive technologies help to bridge the digital gap? How do you relate the two elements? And can you give us a few examples of how this can be done?
So at the moment, we would be seeing a range of people at the ACTU where I work. I think in the last 10 years, the kind of equipment that we have there has moved on from originally a whole vast array of very specialist devices to include nowadays a lot of mainstream tablets and mobiles. There are some people who come to see us that we are able to provide a solution that is very mainstream. And we would see that there are some groups within people who have disabilities who are maybe more able to avail of that mainstream technology. But there are a whole range of people who's still out there who need very specialist solutions. In particular, people who have communication needs, people who have intellectual disabilities, maybe even cognitive disabilities. And for these people, it is not always within our, that we can give an affordable solution, going back to the issue of cost, and that we will have to think about solutions that can be quite expensive. I would also say, however, that sometimes we need specialist technology in order to provide access to mainstream technology. So it could be that we are able to use what we need to use on a tablet, on a PC, but the person has some physical challenges that prevents him from being able to use typical touchscreen or a mouse. So at that point, we need to think about access. And we could be thinking about alternative keyboards, mice, and eye gaze even as an option. For people with communication impairments, we would have augmentative and alternative communication solutions, AAC solutions. And again, you might say to me, can't you use an AAC app on a tablet? And for some people, we can. But there are going to be other people that we need maybe a more robust solution that's better integrated, especially, for example, for someone who's an eye gazer and who needs to have a system that's mounted on his wheelchair. So in that situation, we probably are going to go for something that is specifically built for purpose. The other issue or the other kind of trend that we are seeing now, however, is with AAC systems becoming much more multifunctional. So someone comes to me, needs a system to support their communication, but we're also going to use the same system to support access to education and employment. So another thing that might happen there is that we might have poor literacy skills, and so the person isn't able to use text which, as we know, is what we see a lot of on the web, on the internet and everywhere. And so we can provide interfaces via AAC specific software, which is designed to make things more simplified for a person maybe who cannot read. So, for example, a simplified YouTube interface that would support them to be able to access a lot of these applications that we use without thinking, but that they might struggle to understand how to use. And even to understand how to navigate through apps, websites on the internet. Those are the things that nowadays we can integrate into an app that was, or a piece of software that was originally designed to support communication. So we're seeing quite a lot of trends there at the moment. I don't see us moving to 100% mainstream solutions for everyone anytime soon. I think that there's always going to be a need, especially those specific groups of people with disability and people who maybe have more than one disability, so it's more complex. And then we have to think how we're going to solve that. And really, it shouldn't be about money at the end of the day. It's about getting the best solution for that person to be able to do what they want to do, to participate in the same way as other people in their lives. So I kind of have to do this whole assessment without thinking about cost, but thinking about what's the best thing for them at this point in time, what they want to do as well. And one comment I would like to make is that sometimes people don't realize that they could do something, maybe because the knowledge is not out there, maybe because people around them haven't got that knowledge, and that they come into a team like us, they say, right, we want to communicate, but no one has thought, well, would you like to be able to send someone a message on Facebook? Would you like to be able to post on Instagram? And these are things that other people have not even considered. Maybe it's an under expectation, but they haven't actually considered that, yeah, this person could do this. It just needs to have someone maybe guide them on the right way, not right way, but a way that they could do this. And it's probably possible with the right expertise or with the right knowledge.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you, May. Interesting to see at first appearance, maybe different opinions about mainstreaming and specialism, but I assume that actually there's a lot of agreement between you in terms of how that relates, but maybe we can come back to that,
Yeah.
that afterwards. I have a question for Eva-Tian. How can assistive technologies help digital skills of persons with disabilities? How could that interaction work?
Thank you for the question, Thomas. I would like to connect with what May says, because we are service providers as well in Bologna, so it's very recognizable what she says. I think what becomes clear in what she said is that there are two big trends. One is that assistive technology is increasingly digital technology. And the other one, that the distinction between mainstream technology and assistive technology, especially accessible mainstream, is getting increasingly blurred. So, which means that in order to be efficient assistive technology users, or like we'd like to, like what the term that we normally use is assistive solutions, exactly because finding an assistive solution for a person, supporting a person to identify his or her own personal assistive solution requires careful engineering, requires careful investigation, keeping the person in the center, trying to identify what are the needs, what are the wishes, what are what people would like to reach with that technology. And then, of course, the more digital skills people already have, the easier it becomes. So this is a sort of a bi-directional relationship. The more digital skills I have, the easier it will be to adopt a piece of assistive or a proper assistive solution. And the other way around, assistive solutions help you to access digital environments and thus to develop digital skills. And ideally, it's not a black and white situation or yes, no, but it's a process that has to be conducted over time. So people grow, develop their skills thanks to assistive technology, then maybe get ready for more complex systems. So that is, but maybe we should stop dividing the world in people that use assistive technology and people that do not use assistive technology. But we should really think about what is my personal equipment? What do I feel comfortable with to use in being able to interact, to learn, to work, to do, everything that everybody does or would like to do. And only if we think about that, what I like about, for example, your organization, ESPD, Tom, is that ESPD does not use so much the term assistive technology, but has always focused on the person-centeredness of technology. So it's the membership forum, for example, within ESPD, which is working on technology. It's called the Person-Centered Technology Member Forum. And I think that's, I mean, initially it was a bit difficult for me coming from the assistive technology world to understand it, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. And we should really go that way. In recognizing diversity, different needs, identifying, supporting people in finding the right solution for them, and keep doing that. So we also need services to be able to, we need services like the one that May just described and the one that we have in Bologna, which are actually at the service of people and can accompany them in identifying what technology can do for them and which technology.
Thank you, Evert-Jan. Particularly what I take note there is the two-way relationship between digital skills and assistive technology and how that relate to each other. Now we can maybe go to you, to the crowd. I don't know if there are any questions that you have. Does anyone have any questions for any of the speakers, or maybe an area where they disagree? There's a question here at the front. Can we have a microphone, please? And if you could also briefly present yourself. Sorry.
Yes, my name is Maddalena Ilario and I am an endocrinologist chairing the Reference Site Collaborative Network. I just have a question about the cost, because it has been touched upon, but I was wondering whether you experts think that evaluating the value and how we can evaluate the benefits of the introduction of these assistive technologies more broadly could be somehow measured. Because if you want to scale up, you need to talk to policymakers and they understand the cost. So if they see the assistive technology as a cost, then they won't buy into it. But if they see it as an investment and there is a return of this investment that impacts society, impacts productivity, saves money, then maybe, so what do you think we should measure in terms of methodology, or how can we ignite this conversation to engage economists or something into this?
Thank you for that question. A cost, maybe Evert-Jan, I can see you're interested to answer.
Yes, if you want, I can give an answer to that, or try to give an answer, because you touch upon a very realistic and clear point, although it's often neglected anyway by people, even if we bring figures about the cost-benefit analysis, many politicians still do not seem particularly interested, because we're talking about long-term benefits. So there are existing models that compare the cost of intervention with assistive technology with the cost of non-intervention or with different solutions. They normally have a sort of a 5 or 10 years perspective, because you know that assistive technology is never for the rest of your life, because people change, technology change, etc., etc. So you have to give it a timeline. And then you can, it depends on what you bring into the model, whether you say, okay, there are other costs, maybe there are environmental adaptations, if you think about an independent living project. But there are also benefits, for example, the amount of hours care which is needed can be reduced significantly. Sometimes this is in cash, because there's an external provider, care provider, who instead of going 2 hours a day or 1 hour a day only come, about 5 or 10 hours a day only comes 1 hour a day. Or it can be social cost, because, for example, it might be that the person is looked after by a family member who gave up her job or his job to be able to assist son or daughter. And if maybe that's no longer needed, then the person can go back to work. So depending on how broad you take it, you can come up with models. We did that quite systematically for a while and demonstrated that in all cases you obtain cost savings. Mostly social cost savings, but not only. Also, for example, if you put a person in a position to be able to participate in labor and start to generate income for themselves, that's amazing. But for example, in home adaptation or bringing a person in able to control the living environment to stay safe alone, it's amazing. Then you really talk about hundreds and thousands of euros in a 5 years perspective. But governments don't normally have annual budgets, so they only see the investment.
Thank you, Evert-Jan. Anyone else would like to complement that?
Yeah, I could, if I may. So it's a very good question, and I think really we need to start talking more about money than we do, because this really, and it's kind of the community says, but it's good for everyone, and that's kind of true, but it doesn't really help when we do policies. I think it's very important. We have done in the Nordic countries some studies where we have focused on employability, so a little bit about what Evert-Jan was talking about. So if a person with a disability is unemployed and receives money from the government, my taxpayers' money, on some kind of social security or like that, and if we can move that person out of that system and into the labor market, and that person start instead paying taxes, so we get, instead of giving them money to receiving money from them from a society perspective, I think that is what we have found at least is the easiest way to show really good numbers and kind of clear numbers, and we have not done that in a couple of years, but we had an agency asking for that kind of studies, and we did a follow-up after a couple of years. So I think it's possible to measure, but too little is done in that. We still need a lot of more research and kind of real proof with numbers. I think so.
I have maybe a question for you, Alejandro. As a representative of people with disabilities, what is your opinion about this whole cost debate? Because is it about human rights? Then if it's about human rights, it's about putting it in place. I mean, how do you relate to this cost debate in some ways? Does it make sense to you, or is it just?
Yeah, it does. It does, and it's true that maybe we'll need to start talking more about money, as Susanna says. For us, it's a human rights issue, and as so we advocate for it, regardless of the monetary or budgetary implications. But obviously, when we talk with policymakers, you need to, or they ask you about this perspective. In the end, we stress what was already mentioned by Evert-Jan and by Susanna. We stress that the potential and the added value of the 15% of the population that persons with disabilities represent to society, and the positive impact of inclusive education, of access to the open labor market, and the role that any technology can play in this it should go. It should support this statement, and it's true that we don't then kind of make this distinction between it should be like cheap solutions. No. It's the most suitable solution for the user. In the end, this is what matters, regardless whether this is an assistive technology that has been designed just for this particular group of person with disabilities, or whether this is a mainstream solution. So we are starting to work more on assistive technology policy models. This is something that is dealt mostly at national level. We believe that nevertheless there is a possibility for the EU to be a little bit more active on this matter, because this is in the end an internal market issue or competence, and this is one of the main competence of the EU. So we believe that the EU institution could look at how we can kind of harmonize a common playing field for assistive technology that can also support the affordability of assistive solutions. We have done so, for example, in the electronic communications regulations, but this goes obviously beyond this. So there is still a long way to go when it comes to the EU role in this field.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was a very...
No, it's very useful. It seems a bit that we're, in some ways, between ESPD and EDF, in this case, going a bit in opposite directions, because we worked for a long time on, for us, it's primarily about access to care services and the cost of the investment that's needed there. Policymakers always said, can you show us that there's an added value investing in care services economically? Okay, we do lots of research, we prove there's an added value in there, and still they don't want to change. So in some ways, sometimes talking about cost, it's like a bit of a rabbit hole. Like, you know, they send you down occupational therapy. Like they just say, okay, we don't want to do it, so how are we going to make them think and waste their time to try and get data? Ultimately, a bit where we're coming back to, but we're not denying cost, investment, economy, of course not. But ultimately, it's about human rights and the responsibility of public authorities to implement human rights. It might sound a little bit the ideal world type of thing, but I think as lobbyists, as organizations, it's our job to keep pushing for that, because if we don't, who does? So I think that interaction between cost, economy, that element of things, in our experience, is just sending us down the rabbit hole. And ultimately, it's maybe even more important that we keep repeating it's about human rights. So there's at least that relationship, which maybe we haven't got the ideal solution yet, but that's our experience.
And quality of life.
And quality of life.
So you should never bring only a cost-benefit analysis, but also measure the impact on quality of life of people, and then you have a very convincing argument.
Indeed. Okay, any other questions? Any brave soul? Okay, I have plenty of questions. So that's.
So if I may just add
yes,
that I think the cost, and I understand why it may feel kind of wrong to talk about money when you talk about human rights, and I agree with that. I just feel it's easier to kind of sell the concept if you can also show with numbers. And really, the policymakers, they have a long list of priorities that they need to do something, and they have a budget that is this big. And I think one way of pushing it kind of on top of the agenda when it comes to prioritization is to say, hey, you can also save money. That, in my experience, that can make policymakers a little bit more positive, so that they listen to you, and then you can, of course it has to do with human rights, but it's just a way of arguing that at least in my experience, works sometimes better. Yeah.
Okay,
sorry,
Alejandro.
No, a very an anecdote on this matter. Sometimes the cost issue is used to lobby against it as well. I perfectly remember the representative of Business Europe in the European Parliament saying that the European Accessibility Act will cause that the prices of technologies and the products covered by the directive will go up. So we need to be cautious as well. And,
it's a bit within the care sector. We have the EU Care Strategy now, which is a very strong message that actually care is an investment, not a cost, economically speaking, for lots of reasons. We will see a major change in policy at national level around care, even though there's evidence of the added value? Not really. So that's my criticism, is that even when we have the evidence, it doesn't do everything. So we need maybe taking different avenues to achieve it. There was a question at the back, sir. Can we have a microphone, please?
Hello. My name is Alejandro Rodríguez Ascaso. I'm a lecturer at the Spanish National Distance Learning University. And a couple of short comments. I think one additional, I completely agree with the cost topic. I think it's important to stress it. But also, we live in a time where we cannot leave anyone behind, because we need everyone. We need so much talent for digital, for people working in digital field, that we cannot exclude anyone, because we need everyone. So we need accessibility in place. Another thing, and I think you have commented, is that we feel in our university we have like almost 8,000 students with disabilities, and we see that there is sometimes a problem when people are not using the right or the there, for example, for screen readers, there are very different screen readers now. We have some legacy systems that are still in use, and people are not aware of the new software. And sometimes the old software is not completely interoperable with the mainstream learning platforms, for example. And also the evolution, the personal evolution of disability, where we were trying to provide more support on people on, for example, when to change from magnification software to screen reader software. I think that advice is also missing, and these two comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, any feedback? Any?
I can feedback on this one. I think a lot of times what happens is people with disabilities come to a service like ours, we make a recommendation, and then they don't come back, or we would have closed the case. But if you look at it the way that Evert Jan said, it is a process. Things change, technology changes, and the disability might change as well. And then tying this up to the whole cost thing, teams like ours tend to be very small, expensive to run. And so what happens is that you don't get that ongoing support that maybe is required to continue to support someone to access things that maybe have improved, that could make things better for them. And so they might not know about them, or they might need support to adapt or adjust to the new thing. So I think it isn't an easy thing, this, and I think it is going to happen. What you've just described, I can actually see that as an issue. And I have got cases that I haven't closed because I know that there's going to be another step and another step, and you end up keeping them forever because they need that ongoing support. Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And actually, I think that I'm sure that one of the reasons why many persons with disabilities stick to legacy technology or legacy solution is because they work for them, and we are afraid of changing to a new thing that you don't know for sure whether it would work or not. I mean, I know that there are groups of people with disabilities to support each other saying, should I update this operating system or not? Has anybody had any problems? So kind of checking before that the things will keep working, because unfortunately, in the past, it was more common that every new update or new technology had some bug that prevented or ruined the accessibility of it. So this kind of fear to the new could be actually, as you well said, be solved with more support in this regard to keep the.
I think this even happens to us. We open, to all of us, we open up an application that we haven't opened up for 6 months, and we find it looks different because it's been updated. And then we have to work out how to use it, and we have to accept it. And I think for someone with disability, and I've been there, it can be quite a scary thing that something has to change. And sometimes it has to, because that legacy software is not going to work anymore. There is a new thing out there. I have users of communication aid software where they have decided to combine 3 or 4 different vocabularies rather than say, this is the new one. And so they keep building and building it, and they end up with a very convoluted and complex system, but they understand it. And I'm okay with that then, because if it works for them, it works. But I know that the last one probably was the one that would be fine. So, in a way, I think people with disabilities have to guide us in terms of what works for them. But I understand where that question is coming from, because it's so difficult to deal with, especially when it's forced on somebody that have to use something else, and they might not want to.
Any other questions? If not, I may ask actually the panelists, do any of you have questions for your fellow panelists?
I just wanted to clarify that I don't at all think that we have different opinions about the need for assistive technology or anything like that. When I was speaking about mainstreaming, I was just thinking, like, for me, I need magnification, and now I can do that in the mainstream tech instead of taking resources from the assistive technology sector. That is a good thing, because then Hector and his guys are paying for that and hopefully earning money on it. So that's good. But that doesn't, we need to be very careful that the policymakers don't take money away from the specific assistive technology and other services just because now it's kind of mainstream so that you don't need it anymore, because that's a real risk. But if we just make sure that we don't take money away from the specific solutions that some people with disabilities need, I think mainstreaming is a very good thing for many users, but absolutely not for everyone. So I just wanted to make that clear, that I didn't argue against assistive technology.
No, we know.
My next question was actually precisely on that too. Thank you. Evert Jan, we haven't talked about it much here. could you explain why it's so important for technology developers to make sure that they use user-centered designs, user-driven approaches? So, integrating what people with disabilities in this case need. Why is it so important?
Well, the most obvious answer, Tom, would be that it leads simply to better products and services if they are designed together with the users, the potential users. And that is basically because the needs and the requirements, as well as the opportunities and the constraints, are better understood in a user-centered design process.
Can I interrupt you a little bit then, just to be provocative? Then why doesn't everyone do it if it's so self-evident?
Because it's not easy, it's difficult. Methodologically, it's quite complex. It requires attitudinal change as well. It requires taking that person very, very seriously and not longer see him or her as a person that you're going to solve the solution, but as a partner that together you're working with. And that is for 95%, I would say, of the developers, still very difficult. So we have methodological issues. We have also competence related, to bring it back to the skills related issues. It's not easy, even if you have a direct experience with disability and inaccessible environments, to be able to exactly identify what the problem is and to explain that to someone else. So also that requires training, requires collaborative work. Of course, the best would be if a lot of people with disabilities also become designers themselves. But also that requires investment in training programs and skills. And further, there's no one that actually obliges you to do it. So when you produce a piece of technology, it will be tested, it will respond to all kinds of standards, technical standards, safety standards, whatever. But as far as I know, whether users and to what extent validate the solution is actually never asked. So that's left to the market.
Mm-hmm.
But there is an EN standard for design for all processes, so
There
you
is
can
a
use
standard
it.
for
And
process.
that is one of the standards that we are going to update when we work on the mandate for the Accessibility Act. So wait and see.
Okay, no, I know that there is a standard, the ISO standard. It's very short, by the way, yeah? It's 3 or 4.
17160. Oh, yeah.
Involve the user, test it, try again, improve your solution, try again. I don't know whether there's
Yeah, but
it has
it's
improved in the meantime.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
but
a long
the
standard, but-
stages are
Yeah.
3 steps, very basic.
7, I think.
But that's
Anyway.
because it's a standard. Standards have to go through long processes during which they are, everybody has to agree. So in the end, they tend not to be very specific. But I'm looking forward to the new one.
Great. So you want to come in, Alejandro?
No, yes, standards are also very close to my heart. This one is actually to change the internal processes of the standard that Susanna was mentioning, the Design for All standard, which title is actually accessibility following a Design for All approach, extending the range of users or something like that. It's
Short and sweet.
Even the titles are long. The idea of this standard is to give recommendations and requirements to any kind of organization. So it can be a tech company, it can be a small city hall, it can be an NGO, on how to change internally the processes so they extend as much as possible the potential users of the product services that this organization can do. But it goes a little bit, I think it goes very much into details on specific recommendations. Now we'll need to see how we adapt it for the European Accessibility Act purposes. But this standard, unfortunately, is not as well known as the other standard on accessible ICT, but it has a lot of potential. So I really hope that with the Accessibility Act mandate, it will become more known, I hope.
And it's also easier to read than
Yeah,
the 301
yeah,
because it's not technical.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Required reading for everyone. Should be on everyone's beside the bed table or whatever you call
To
it.
get asleep.
Yeah.
Read the minutes of the
Sorry, Tom, can I add a point here?
Yes.
I think it also, I mean, user-centered design, whether it's products or services, also much better fit a rights-based approach to disability. It's like I said, it's not only by like taking more seriously or ticking a box or okay, we did it or it will lead to better products. It's very much also relates to for me the sort of the ultimate empowerment of people, the ultimate the end of an emancipatory process where people actually pick up responsibilities as well for what has been designed, because it's a question is being involved. Question is, or another aspect is taking responsibility. So what I would expect from the people that we involve in the design of new service, and that they also, to a certain extent, do it with commitment and pick up responsibility for the results, because it's a question of like I said, partnering and ultimately giving that precise identity as an individual that is able to, let's say, to fully pick up responsibility for his or her own life.
Yes, but
As a
the
consumer.
users also need to be treated like the experts they are and paid.
Of course, that's among the methodological issues that I mentioned.
We have around 12 minutes to go. One element is that would like to be discussed is who is responsible for creating an environment where we improve the current state of play around digital divide, accessibility, and so forth? Is it to which extent is it policymakers? To which extent maybe is it the companies themselves? Well, Microsoft, for example, or others. Or is it a bit of everyone who has to play a role? How do you see the responsibility for moving forward? Maybe you first, May.
I think it's quite a complex question, this, because ultimately you have teams like ours, but I can tell you that we can only go so far. If we don't have the policies and the frameworks in place, then I can make a recommendation, but then I have problems with getting funding. Then I have problems with the teaching of digital skills even during education. So starting from young age, so that I have people that I'm working with who maybe don't know skills that could have been taught had that been part of the education system. And then I have problems with employers who maybe aren't willing or able, or don't have the right environment to support people with disabilities within the work setting. So personally, I feel that if we don't have the policies and the frameworks, and we're not talking about people just signing things off, because that is one of the biggest issues. It's actually then how that translates into the real life for people with disabilities and for the people that then have to implement. Something is, I would think there's often there's a gap. You've got the policy coming somewhere from Europe, but then what's actually happening in the country? And have the local policymakers done anything at that point? Have they put money behind it? But I don't think money is even the biggest issue, because generally I can find the money. The problem is that I don't have the right ecosystem. And I think the ecosystem has a lot of people involved, a lot of players, including people with disabilities themselves, who sometimes aren't the most vocal. They're not always looking for their rights. In Malta, definitely, I would say that they could be quite quiet, but not the ones making a fuss, and they should be. And then sometimes they don't have maybe advocacy either to support them to do that. So there are many, many different things, I think, that need to be looked at in a particular country and on a country basis.
Mm-hmm. Alejandro, I see you thinking.
Yeah, all the time.
What are you thinking about?
No, I'm thinking that it's. I was thinking about particularly the last bit that May mentioned on some disability groups not being so vocal. I mean, it's true that it really depends on on the context, and obviously the urgencies and the most pressing issues of the movement, sometimes because of lack of resources. We know well this in the NGO sector. You need to prioritize, and sometimes you need to pick your battles, right? But it is true, and we've seen that in the US and in Europe to a certain extent as well, that the strength of the disability movement in calling for their rights, in being vocal, has resulted in policy changes that at the end of the day need to be picked up for implementation. And one other element that I want to bring here is leadership. So it really makes a difference when you have a strong disability movement that adopts and pushes for the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But then you need to have the commitment of the state parties to implement it. In the EU, for example, to bring the closest example we have here in Brussels, we have now for the first time a European commissioner who is responsible in her mission letter to implement the UNCRPD, Commissioner for Equality, Elena Dali. Her performance can be better, can be worse, but at least now there is a clear leadership within the highest level of the European Commission for implementation of the convention. When it comes to accessibility, same. I mean, if we look at the big tech like Microsoft, like Apple and others, we see that they have a clear leadership when it comes to accessibility, a clear roadmap, a clear strategy. We could think that this have come because of the US legislation, because of the US disability movement that fought for the right for the Americans with Disabilities Act, for the rehabilitation, and we can go back. But the truth is that the changes are made on the origin because of the disability movement being formed and being vocal about their rights. So they need to have the resources to do so, to have a clear strategy, to have a clear leadership, and to implement those changes. I don't know if I summarized all the pieces, but this is how I understand it, at least.
Absolutely. We have 6.5 more minutes. Is there a final question? Last opportunity in the middle here. Someone can bring a mic. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathleen. I'm from Belgium here. I work for an accessibility bureau in Flanders, the Dutch part of Belgium. Not really a question, more like when we're talking about policy, I find it interesting, like, except for making some signatures, like we want to do this. For me, it's also very important they have like they have to be an example, set the example. That's something that I think is also very important, not only thrive to do things, but set the example as policy makers or workers. So not really a question, but something I would like to add, in my opinion.
Setting example. Yeah, indeed. I see a lot of nodding. When we're talking about setting the example, we often, in some ways, look at the role of the EU in sharing examples, sharing good practices, in developing legislation, and so forth. Susanna, how would you see the role of the EU in pushing this debate forward? Is it on the right tracks? Is there areas which are maybe missing? What is your view on that?
So just to go back on your previous questions, I think I see the 4 pillars as public sector, private sector, NGOs, and research. I think all of those 4 stakeholder groups need to be involved to do things. I don't think one is more important than the other. We need to work together. So I don't know if EU is pushing the debate, but I think EU is pushing the whole accessibility issue or challenge forward. I tend to say these days that EU is leading this. US was leading before, but now it's really the EU. Yeah. I think we are doing policy and legislation more cleverly than anywhere else in the world, and I'm nowadays very proud to be working closely with the Commission. I don't claim that they do everything right, but I think really EU is leading the way here. We have done amazing job when it comes to the Web Accessibility Directive. We have just reviewed how it works and the way that we do a combination of monitoring from the top down, the feedback system from users that go the kind of bottom-up approach, and then the self-declaration in the middle with the public sector body. That has never been done before, and the monitoring piece that was done in all member states, that is the biggest audit of digital accessibility ever performed anywhere. So I don't claim that everything is fixed and perfect. Absolutely not. We have still a lot to do. I can't retire tomorrow, unfortunately, but I think EU is leading the way here. And that's amazing. I never thought I would say that in my entire career, but I think we are now the front runners. That's kind of cool.
It is.
Alejandro,
No,
you agree?
No, yeah, totally. Totally.
Can I make a point
Yes,
here?
Sebastian.
No, I agree as well. Although I think that the problem is not so much the high-level policy making. The problem is that what happens in schools, what happens in service providers, what happens in sports organizations, etc., etc.
Yeah.
The problem is that we know what we have to do, but very little organizations actually have an own policy on how to make their services more inclusive. Maybe the world of education, with the concept of inclusive education and the use of technology in education, is a little bit more advanced. But if I even look at the sector of the work integration and social economy, there are a lot of organizations. We're involved in a project which is called the WISE project, and we investigated how many organizations actually work with assistive technology or have an accessibility related policy. And although they're specifically working on creating jobs for people with disabilities, only less than 10% uses assistive technology or knows, actively. So structural change is needed. Policy is okay. Policy is just, drops the bomb. But if that's not picked up, and if we don't translate that into better services and better schools and better education opportunities that are really open to the participation of all and that empower people, that enhance the use of technology, then the risk is that in 10 years we're still talking about the same topics.
Indeed, that's a message for, in particular, maybe for ESPD, which represents organizations which, in some ways, specialize in supporting people with disabilities. And yet, as a sector, we're so bad on assistive technology. We were talking earlier with Susanna around accessibility and things like that. It's not on the agenda. So how can we sort of talk about other mainstream organizations, Microsoft or Apple and others, when even the sector which is meant to do that is so poor and it's more complicated than that, maybe, but it's again.
Yeah, but with daily contact with
Exactly.
with disabilities.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Many of us just don't do it.
Yeah. Okay, we have 1 more minute. Any final comment, maybe, May?
I think Evert Jan just said what I was trying to say earlier, because the policies might be here in Europe, but what actually happens on the ground in each country is where the problems lie. And I liked very much what Alejandro said about the roadmap, because that's where the problems come. Who's going to make this roadmap? In your local country, who's going to help those organizations actually do that, and who's going to push it to the top of the agenda in the organization? So policies are great from the EU, but what actually happens on the country level is another thing. Yeah, that's
Indeed. Susanna, last comment?
No, I agree. And I think we just need to keep working and work together. And also, as I always say, it's very nice to meet all of you, but we need to talk to the others. So let's go out and spread the word about the need for this human rights and accessibility and everything with and everyone else who is not specifically interested in the topic of accessibility, because we tend as a community to talk to ourselves. And I think we need to also talk to others, because we need to spread the word.
And that's why it's so great also for Microsoft for hosting us here as well. So thank you also for Microsoft. Alejandro, the last word?
No, the last word is to stress again that indeed the challenge is to implement all these policies and this good objective that we have as for accessibility, independent living, participation in all aspects of life of persons with disabilities into a reality into the real, everyday lives of persons with disabilities. And again, to do so, we have as we said, we are very happy to have the policies in place, but we need a clear political will, political will at national level, but also the will of companies, the will of, the professionals, the universities, everybody, the disability movement, everybody concerned to really make these policies a reality.
Thank you, Alejandro. And for me to conclude, maybe one last element, because I was going to say exactly the same as you, Alejandro. And it was mentioned earlier by Susanna, ultimately it's about choice, it's about creating choice to allow people to live the lives that they want to live. And therefore bridging the digital divide is creating choice for people. And that's the responsibility of all of us in doing that. So can we applaud and also wave the hands? Very well. Thank you to our panelists. And I think there's a coffee break. Not yet. Okay.